All right. So I just finished The Sopranos entirely. I watched the entire sixth season instead of breaking it up into two parts. And that was only because that first part kind of ended on like a wet fart. It was kind of just like a wait. There's going to be more, I guess. More build up. It's kind of like the end of season 4, except even weaker. So, but yeah, whatever. Um, let's try to get into it. Um, and this, I'm not going to do any spoilers because I mean, at this point we're 6 seasons in, and also, I mean, this show is what 2 decades old now. Um, at least this season is. So just going in, but I mean, if you want to know the verdict on the ending, I mean, I knew technically what the ending was going in from the very beginning. I avoided spoilers for basically everything else, but I knew basically what the ending was, more or less. And what did I think of it? It's okay. We'll talk about that more at the very end, though. I'll talk about that at the very end of this discussion. I have quite a bit to say, actually, and it's very kind of interesting, you know. Um, yeah, all things considered. The show overall, though, again, this has got to be one of the best shows, quite simply ever. Right? It's right up there with The Wire, honestly. Generally speaking, I'm not usually satisfied with uh, series endings. I'm not usually, I don't know, pissed off by them either. But this one in particular, yeah, it was meh. But just to compare it to others, I would say that I certainly preferred The Wire's ending. Now, The Wire, of course, season 5 in generally gets scrutinized because of its storyline in general. Um, now, I might have to rewatch it to see how the writing itself holds up because I watched it before I got more into writing craft, of course. It was definitely more on the, I guess it stepped more into the fantastical. It's probably not the right word to use. I'm not talking about like fantasy and magic, but like if you know what I mean, it was a bit more close to like Breaking Bad than a grounded, realistic story, right? Like if if we're talking about like a comparison between like Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, like The Wire is probably even more grounded, brutal, and realistic than even Better Call Saul. I mean, leave the brutalness out of to the side. Just talk about how grounded it is, and yeah, and how low stakes. It just yeah. But leaving aside season 5 of The Wire, the ending though, I thought they landed it quite well. Right, but one distinction though between that and The Sopranos, The Wire and The Sopranos though, is that The Sopranos has like a very clear titular character, a very clear protagonist, and that is Tony Soprano. And The Wire, it does not necessarily, right? There's a very sprawling cast of characters. You follow quite a few different people on both the crime side and the police side. Of course, there is Jimmy McNulty, and he kind of like is a loose thread, a kind of little protagonist that kind of pulls together everything, you know. But it's not as clearly defined, right? You know, there's no Tony Soprano, there's no Walter White, there's no Ned Stark, or I'm kidding about the last one, but like you get the point. It is a bit like Game of Thrones, actually, except it's actually well written. Um, but moving on, we'll talk more about the ending and in terms of actual substance here. Actually, I want to compare it to Better Call Saul as well. I was actually kind of like meh on the Better Call Saul ending. I, as I mentioned, I'm pretty critical of it, of endings in general. So it was just like, yeah, it's over. I guess the show's done. So whatever, and it was, and I've kind of realized in retrospect, even with Breaking Bad, they kind of make he kind of makes the endings a bit too wholesome for my taste. It's very strange. Yeah, I don't know, right? I wanted to be a bit. I wanted Walt to get. I wanted things to be a bit nastier for him, actually, and if anything, I wanted things to be a bit nastier for Tony. But again, we'll get into that. And for Better Call Saul, I get that that one was not as like brutal, but the whole bus scene where like they're all doing the little song dance thing or whatever that was. Yeah, I think that was criticized in particular, though. To be fair, but yeah. All right, so let's move on. So at the very beginning of the season, it basically takes off with a bang because Tony is shot by his demented uncle, Junior. Um, basically, and this sets off a whole lot of repercussions, and a lot of them were, in some respects, rather humorous as well. Like I liked how Sil was basically the de facto leader, but suddenly he started having like asthma attacks, and he just couldn't handle the stress. And then all of a sudden, he had to go to the hospital, and basically nothing could function in his absence. And then, they kept hinting that what's his face, AJ is going to avenge Tony by going after Junior. And we'll talk more about AJ later on, but there was those hints as well, and they were also hinting at the time that Vito was going to make moves as well, which was easy to forget. And he also sees Meadows' fiance again. So there was a lot going on in these first few episodes, and that got me excited, right? Like there was a lot. I had like high expectations. So, and there's a lot of good like black comedy thrown in there as well. So there, honestly, it was kind of disappointing with a lot of some of these either drop threads or red herrings. And I don't mind having some red herrings, to be sure, right? Like the fact that Vito never gets his chance to make his move, that's fine, right? Because of what actually happened, right? But what happened with AJ, the fact that this whole plot line of him trying to seek vengeance against Junior kind of just like peters out and then gets revived and then peters out again. It just it shows that there's a fundamental problem, a writing problem with AJ's character. Yeah, I don't want to get into AJ's character just yet, but because I have a lot to say about him. But yeah, yeah, lots of problems with that. But yeah, I guess that's the first thing I wanted to talk about is how it went off with a bang, right? Tony is shot, and there's like this 4 episode thing where they're setting up all these plot threads and stuff, and Tony has all these revelations and stuff like that, and it feels like some of it just kind of just goes nowhere. So let's touch upon where some of the stuff actually ends up going. All right, so let's talk about the Vito plot thread. So as you know, from the prior seasons, I can't even remember which season it was. Was it season 4 or 5? Vito is seen by Finn, which is Meadow's fiance, and he's sucking some guy's dick. Yeah, so it was like a security guard's dick, and it keeps hinting, and he keeps making all these like passive aggressive. I was gonna say passive aggressive. No, it's just aggressive passes at Finn every time he sees him, right? And the obvious implication is that Vito is going to do something about Finn. However, they end up subverting this in a way, and this is actually a good kind of subversion, I would say. And the way they end up subverting this is by having Finn or having Vito get discovered in another way. He's out in some gay nightclub and he gets spotted by some guys from New York, right? And he basically flees. And he goes up to New Hampshire and he seeks out a new life there. And basically everyone finds out, and Phil Leotardo is basically he's like a member of his family, but I think Vito married into his family is how it worked. So in other words, he married like his cousin or something like that. Or I think they like kind of like made a joke out of it where like Phil like implied that he was more closely related in the beginning with the Vito stuff, but then afterwards it turns out they were like second, third cousins, twice removed, whatever, like whatever that means. But either way, they're related somehow, right? So yeah, it causes this big controversy. Tony, of course, he's one of Tony's men, so Tony has to deal with it somehow. And he's also one of Tony's biggest earners. He's, of course, lost a lot of weight lately, and he's also been very loyal and yeah, he's just a good man. At least within the context of the mob, right? He still does awful things, right? Because he's part of the mob. But you get my point, right? But yeah, so Vito's run off. Everyone's being forced to deal with this, and of course, Vito ends up falling in love, having a gay relationship in New Hampshire, but it eventually comes down to the fact that he can't handle it. And I like the way they handled the writing here, is that he eventually chooses to go back, right? It's not that they track him down and kill him. No, he goes back. And he goes to Tony, and then Tony chooses to kill him. Basically, Tony is reluctant about it. Like, he doesn't want to have to kill him, right? Like, he is disgusted by homosexuality, stuff like that. But he's a good person, good money maker. That's the word I'm looking for. And so he resists. But Phil Leotardo is making such a stink about this. But Tony's just like, okay, so this guy's so headstrong about this that there's no point in fighting, right? Like, I'm not going to like fight a battle over some gay guy, right? So we're just gonna let him have him. I guess let him have him is not the right way of putting it. We're just going to kill him off, and that'll prevent Phil from torturing and killing Vito, and that'll bring an end to all of this. But of course, the way things turn out is that Phil gets his hands on Vito first. He ends up torturing and killing Vito, shoves a pool stick up Vito's ass, all of that. And yeah, it's quite brutal. And also there's stuff worth talking about, like with Vito's family, where he convinces his kids that he's part of the CIA. And he has to go work in like the Middle East and stuff like that, and that's why he's been away from home and stuff like that. And they got to keep a secret and stuff like that. But when he dies, there's a story about it, about his death, and they learned that he was gay through that, and that he was never part of the CIA. And it's just, yeah, real ugly. And this death, the fact that Phil, again, he's part of the New York crew rather than the New Jersey crew, which is Tony Soprano's crew. The fact that Phil is the one that kills Vito, this only escalates the tensions between the two mob groups. So, of course, it just creates more tensions. But and that, of course, is built upon throughout the entire season. But we'll talk about that throughout this entire video. What I want to talk about immediately right now, though, is there is an argument between Meadow and Finn about, again, Meadow's blind spot regarding the mob, right? Basically, and they talk about Vito in particular, because they use Finn and his witnessing Vito's dick sucking as evidence, right? They make him come in and share a testimony, use him as evidence, as proof that Vito's gay, right? And he sees all the reactions, and he knows that like Vito's going to, something's going down, right? And well, my issue comes from the fact that it never really gets followed up on, right? Like after Vito dies, I really wanted to see like Finn's reaction, or Meadow's reaction, right? Like, did they ever learn about Vito's death and what happened? You know, afterwards, well, Finn ends up breaking up with Meadow off screen, right? And we just never see Finn again. So, like, there's no scene at all, right? He just kind of just gets off screened, and nothing happens. So, like, my suspicion, and I have no research or evidence to back this up, but my suspicion is that like the actor for Finn just wasn't able to show up anymore, so he just kind of disappeared. And I think this might have happened around the end of part 1 of season 6 and the beginning of part 2. So like maybe that's where it happened, like his contract ended or something like that. But yeah, something like that happened. But yeah, I really wanted to see a scene like that and see how Meadow responds. But no, instead we just get to see Meadow say, "I don't want to talk about it," and we just don't know. Don't know. We don't know anything. Yeah. So another thing I want to talk about, this is going to be a sharp shift, and this is a very small thing. I want to get some of the small things out of the way before I move on to the big meteor stuff. I guess I did get a big meaty thing out of the way. Like a dick. Big and meaty. Tony, this is a note I wrote. Tony might have dug his hole with the terrorism talk. Yeah. So my thinking was that the former FBI agent, he switched to terrorism from season 5 to season 6, right? And he then, over the course of the seasons, Tony starts talking to him, sharing evidence about on the topic of terrorism, right? And my theory was that this was like some undercover op, right, designed to trick Tony and or maybe loop him into terrorism itself, right? So there's those two Arabs who would occasionally show up to the club, Muhammad and Ahmed, or something like that. Just two stereotypical Arab names, right? And yeah, two Arabs, and it, yeah, it did not end up going that way. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. So what I was thinking was that they get like Tony to start buying like arms from like terrorists or something like that, so they can get like him with terrorism charges or something. That would be pretty cool. So it'd be like a roundabout way to come at Tony. And that would be interesting, right? But no, it turns out that that guy actually did switch to terrorism, and it turns out that he was just bored, so he just started hanging around like the meat shop, and he started talking with Tony, and then eventually the guy literally just starts helping Tony track down and uh, find Phil and kill him in the final battle. And and then finally, and this is actually not a critique. I'm not actually like, maybe overall this could have been handled better, but this final scene was actually pretty funny, right? Where where the again, the former FBI agent is just like working on terrorism, and he's just like working on all these boring videos where nothing's happening. And then someone's like, "Hey, did you hear that Phil Leotardo just got shot?" And then the FBI guy is like, "Yeah, we got him! We got him!" He gets all excited, and he uses like first person plural pronouns, as if like he was part of the operation to kill the guy, and then it just cuts away. Yeah. Whoops. I mean, it's not like he's gonna get like charged for that, but still, it's funny. There's some small notes I have written here that I could go over, but yeah, I'll just skip those. So Johnny Sack, he got arrested at the end of, I think it was season 5, maybe it was season 4. Yeah, I think it's season 5. It would have to be season 5. And he's been in prison. And in this season, he ends up taking a plea deal. Basically, he pleads guilty and admits that he does something, and then basically pleads down his sentence to like just like 15 years or something like that. And this actually kind of made me question or ask questions, right? Like, oh, first off, he does end up pissing off a lot of people because he's basically admitting to the existence of the mafia, right? So like that's understandable, right? I understand why people are pissed about that. What I don't understand is why he took the plea deal at all. Why didn't he just go to trial? Like, did I miss something? Like, why couldn't they just like rig the jury like they did with Junior? And like, maybe I shouldn't be like diminishing just how like hard that is to do, and how stressful like an actual trial is, because I know it's like a multi-year long process, and it's like a humiliation process and all of that. But seriously, you should have just stuck it out, right? Hmm. And speaking of Junior, let's move on to Junior. Finally, we get to see. Just kidding. We just see more of the sad, pitiful fall of Junior. He just degrades and collapses and deteriorates more and more and more. And it's just so pitiful. It's so sad. And it's so pathetic. Right? Like I just remember what he was like in the first season, right? And it truly is regrettable. But what can you do? What can you do? All right. Moving on to the meteor elements. I think the first big thing I want to talk about, of course, is Chris Moltisanti. I think Chris is probably one of the best written characters in this show. And the way he is killed off is also, I thought, really well handled. It's one of those things where it just kind of happens, like just suddenly. And also, I mean, the fact that Tony just kills him, like pitilessly, just holds his nose shut and just lets him choke to death on his own blood. Absolutely brutal. And what makes this so tragic is basically everything that comes before, right? It's just the way that he continually relapses and gets better and then relapses and gets better. Like his relationship to drugs and alcohol is such a mess, right? And originally I thought that the writing was a bit sloppy, and maybe in some respects it is. Like maybe they could have handled it a little bit better. But in the aftermath, I kind of see where they were going, right? Like he's constantly going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? And it's ultimately because of, well, one, the mafia lifestyle, and two, the people around him. So, as you know, people are often enablers. And Tony, Polly, Sil, all of these people are constantly mocking him, bullying him, harassing him, making fun of him for being sober. And then, oh, we're just busting your balls, man. And it is so like cruel and vicious the way they treat him. And then, of course, he relapses. And then they're just like brutal in the way they crack down. And I remember there's this one scene where he's at his AA meeting where it's just like they're basically pouring alcohol into his cup with one hand and then judging him with the other, And that's literally what they're doing continually over and over and over again. They're just pushing him back in, demanding him to be in the Bada Bing, which is the strip club, which is, again, swimming with drugs, swimming with alcohol, which is like the center base for the mob. And they just judge him for wanting to be out of that environment. And like after a while, you just have to recognize that like literally the only way he can escape this addiction is by getting out of the game. I mean, I think that's like a term from The Wire, right? The game, right? You have to get out of the mob, right? You have to go all in or go all out. But then again, I mean, there is no all in, actually, because if he goes all in, he'll relapse, and then he'll get judged for that. And then what happens? Tony kills him, and that's ultimately what happens. And like, you feel so bad for him at some point, right? Especially in the scene where Tony's killing him. You see Tony like looking him in the eyes as he like plugs his nose, right? It slowly just kills him, right? Like, that's one aspect of it, right? But then there's the other side of it, which is that Christopher is every bit, a sociopath as Tony is, right? Like, everything we saw, I mean, throughout the entire series, especially through season 5, basically demonstrates who Christopher is. In fact, in season 6 too, he literally point blank shoots a guy, his friend, and kills him to keep him quiet. Right? He just murders him outright. Right? And then, of course, as we discussed in the last review, he gives over his longtime lover, who he's, of course, repeatedly beaten, over to Tony, who orders her execution. So it's just this endless layers of villainy and victimization and villainy and victimization, right? And that's what's so fascinating about the writing of this story, this series, is that you are invested in these characters, and then you like step back and you realize you have these like shock moments, these particular scenes where you realize like, holy shit, like these people are not good people, right? They're not friendly. They're like characters that I would write. And that's precisely why I like this show so much. Yeah. So let's move on to the next character that I want to discuss quite in detail, and that is AJ. Yeah, so what to say about AJ? I remember looking at some review. There's a review of a particular episode where in that episode he decides to go back to college. He gets into English and the Israel-Palestine conflict, which Israel-Palestine, that's been going on for hundreds of years. Hooray. Still going on today. Hooray. And one of the reviews mentioned there's nothing about AJ's character that indicates he'd be interested in these things. And I read that and I asked myself, well, what would he be interested in? And my first thought was, AJ is such a neglected character. And I'm not talking about like by Tony and Carmela. Like, maybe you can make an argument about that, right? Like, I'm not making commentary one way or the other about that, right? My point is that AJ is neglected by the writers, right? He's just such a scantily, poorly handled character. He is so scattershot. He is so all over the place. And like, I get you can have some characters that can swing one way and then swing the other, which is what AJ does in this, where in prior seasons he went the existentialist route of, oh, there's no God, nothing matters, and then in this and this season he starts obsessing about everything and all of the suffering in the world and how he needs to change it and stuff like that. Like, I'm not suggesting you can't have flips like that, but there's just there needs to be more there. There needs to be more meat, more character. There needs to be more substance to be handled. And it just feels like they didn't know what the fuck to do with his character. And here's the thing, they actually gave him a lot to do in this season. But it felt like there was nothing bringing it together. Right? So let's talk about some of those things. So first, AJ, I mentioned before, he wants to kill Junior. Right? It was introduced in those first 4 episodes when Tony was shot and then shot by Junior and then was recovering, etc. And then it gets reintroduced when he actually goes to the facility and tries to carry it out. But then after that, the whole thing just kind of drops. It goes away. Right? Like Tony just confronts him over it, and then it just kind of like drops off. Right? It just chalked up to like a misunderstanding where it's like, well, I just saw in The Godfather, you said your favorite scene was the scene where like the son but avenges his father and blah blah blah, and it's just like right, like people are asking questions like, is AJ going to follow in Tony's footsteps? Like they're asking questions like this, and we're getting slapdash bullshit like this. No. Right, then there's the other plot line where he bring home a thick Latina who's 10 years older than him, and I'm gonna fast forward a little bit of it because like there's this one scene where I just have to mention this particular scene because it was so stupid, so fucking retarded. Right, there's like this like rowdy Latino boys outside. They're playing loud music, and it always scares the baby of Blanca is the name of this thick Latina. Yeah, because not only is she 10 years older than AJ, but she also has a child, right? And she's just frustrated, and like her ex used to beat up the boys and chase them off. Well, AJ goes out to confront them. What does he do? Well, he goes and he pulls out his bike out of his car and he gives it to the boys and says, "Here, have this bike. Will you please leave?" And they leave. And then she be riding dick afterward. Is this meant to be wholesome or something? Am I watching Ted Lasso? Jesus fucking Christ. Like what am I watching? Like that was such a fucking retarded fucking scene. Like why would they leave? Like we're watching the fucking Sopranos. Like not only was this TV show like teasing this idea that AJ might follow in the footsteps of Tony at various points, but it is the Sopranos, so he should have gotten his ass beat if he tried this. But no, we get like this Ted Lasso-esque scene where, oh, I'm gonna do the right thing. I'm gonna give them my bike as a present, and they're gonna just do what I say. Like it reminds me. I've only seen like a fraction of a scene of Ted Lasso, right? And I can already tell I fucking hate that show, right? It's just basically what I saw was He was like a soccer coach or something like that. I don't know anything else about the show other than that it's wholesome, right? And there's like some douchebag player who's like carrying the team essentially, and everything's riding on him essentially, and everyone's cheering for him, and the guy's like gloating and like being a douchebag, like everyone's cheering for me. And at a certain point, Ted Lasso decides to just pull this douchebag out of the game and just like, no, you're sitting out now. Right? Like, I've had enough of your BS. Right? It's not about you, it's about the team. And what happens as a result? Well, the team, through teamwork, wins anyway. And it's not like conflict heavy. It's not, any struggle. I'm pretty sure there's like a minute or two sequence where they just show people like passing. So instead of him, like the douchebag, like driving the ball himself and then scoring a point, just people like passing the ball and scoring a point, right? And they just kind of showed that to demonstrate, and then they win anyway, despite him pulling out their best guy. And then I remember one of the people watching the show at the time, like I was at their house, and they're like, I think Ted made the right choice. And it's like, well, no fucking shit, you do. It's like, he didn't experience any fucking consequences for his choices, right? Like, the point of writing is to make them suffer fucking consequences. God damn it. Right? You make tough decisions. My God. Yeah, I apologize. All right, let's get back on topic here. All right, so moving on, AJ then rushes to try and yeah, so AJ then he rushes to try and marry Blanca, and a few weeks later she actually just breaks it off, right? She hesitantly accepts it and then just breaks it off, runs away. And he gets all depressed and sad and acts like a big baby. And stuff like that. And then he attempts suicide. And I can't remember the overall progression of the events, because there is a point where I want to talk about the suicide attempt in detail, but there is a progression of events where he seems to fall in line with a bunch of teenage gangsters. I can't remember if that happened before the suicide attempt or after. Either way, let's talk about the teenage gangsters. At some point, he seems to revive himself by by hanging out with a bunch of teenage gangsters. I think that happens beforehand, so let's talk about that. Technically, Tony sets him up with them because they were former high school friends, I believe, and they are they run gambling, and they are very brutal. They torture and hurt people in order to get their money back. AJ seems to be into it. So again, we're back to AJ is a potential gangster again. So again, it's just whiplashing all over the place. And this is kind of part of the problem, right? What exactly is AJ? But then again, they take it too far. They pick a fight on like a black guy, I think a Nigerian guy, or just like an African immigrant. Like he had an accent, so it wasn't like an African American. Either way, they call him the N-word, and he gets all depressed again, breaks off the friendships, or at least just stops hanging out with them. And there's obviously a connection because Blanca was non-white as well. And yeah, I think then after that, that's when the suicide attempt comes. And again, this is another significant moment where it may or may not have been incompetent. It may have been a cry for help. But Tony is the one who discovers him and saves him. And then he is put into recovery. And then he ends up finding an underage girl, like a 17-year-old girl, still a junior in high school, while in recovery. And he almost hooks up with her. Ends up blowing up his car. And again, there's two sides here where I guess this is what they're trying to lean into, is that he's being very split-minded about this, schizophrenic. And that is the way he talks about the car burning. He gets excited by it. But then at the same time, his connection to this girl is basically exacerbating his depression in a way. So they keep talking about all of the horrors of the world and how everything's awful. So again, there seems to be multiple sides to AJ. But none of this is well developed. All of it is just coming in season 6. And it feels like a lot of this should have been developed and rounded out way, way, way earlier. Right? So much of this could have been developed. Like season 5, stuff like that. Right? Like this whole, I was hoping that AJ might get sucked into the mob. Like, I know that's like stereotypical, but something that they did in this was something that I had never considered, which is that AJ was getting in with a bunch of boys who were essentially gangsters of their own, and they were setting up their own independent thing. Apart from, so he wasn't getting into the mob through Tony, right? So Tony might be gatekeeping him in his own way, but AJ basically becomes a college gangster, essentially. And I think that would have been an interesting track to go down, right? But whatever. I feel like so much more could have been done with this character, and I feel like this was all, too much was done too late. And all of this was just, too much too late. And it just came off like these two sides of his character, right? Him being both having this dark side to him, where he's like fascinated with cruelty, but then being really sobby and depressed about all the suffering in the world. I mean, it almost seems like they're too contradictory. They didn't do a good job fleshing out his character to actually reconcile the two contradictory aspects. Like, I get that character writing is all about creating internal character contradictions, right? Like Dexter's a serial killer, but he only kills bad people, and stuff like that. Tony is a merciless gangster, but he never beats his wife. He never beats his children. He loves them, wants the best for them. There's always these types of contradictions there, and you can always explore those, and test them even. But again, we just didn't have enough time to do that kind of stuff with AJ, right? We never really explored him as a character. It just, yeah. All right. The penultimate thing I want to talk about before I talk about, of course, the ending, is the Tony and Melfi send-off. All right, so I think that my take on this is actually going to be fairly controversial because I didn't like it. Honestly, I did not think it was well handled at all, actually. um, and apparently it was really well praised, at least at the time. I haven't really seen most people talk about it, but I thought they kind of caricatured Tony a bit at the end there, and they didn't really capture the complexity of Melfi at the end either. Right? It felt like, well, first off, by the way, here's a paper that refutes everything you've been doing for the past 6, 7 years. And it's just like, okay, really? By the way, okay, if they had done that like earlier, not in like the second to last episode or something like that. If they had done that in like season 5, or maybe earlier in the season, something like that, something for Melfi to grapple with, to live in denial with, and wrestle with over multiple episodes, then they could probably have justified it. Sure. But again, it was just like 1 or 2 episodes where like it was just introduced. Oh yes, by the way, here's this paper. and to be fair, like I am caricaturing how it was portrayed, right? Like she did push back. Yes. Right? Like it's not like she like, oh look, here's a paper, and then she read it and she's like, okay, fuck off. No, that's not how it was written. I'm not suggesting that's how it was written. I'm saying the way it should have been handled is, yeah, like perhaps at the beginning of the season, they should have introduced, had the paper introduced. Of course, have her react badly to it, and then maybe have like her psychologist kind of like pry into it a little bit more. Maybe have her maybe start noticing things in the way Tony is talking in their session, stuff like that. Like noticing patterns and like slowly realizing, like, holy shit, like it's like stuff like that. Like I didn't feel like there was enough showing there, right? And let me go through some examples here. So like in the final confrontation between Tony and Melfi, I did think that Tony was caricatured a bit, where like he was saying things like, "Oh, my fucking wife," or like maybe I should have gave him a good kick in the ass, like when talking about his son, and like Melfi kind of like predicted what he was saying, and these were like, of course, like passing remarks that he often repeats, right? And I guess these are like meant to be indicative of what the papers is saying, right? That he's a sociopath and that he's just, yeah, like a monster essentially. And it's just like, I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that's good enough. My fucking wife, like people vent about their wife like all the time, right? Like one of the most striking things about Tony is the fact that he doesn't beat Carmela. Like Chris beat Adriana. And I'm not saying that he respects her. Like he cheats on her all the time. But even then, and then the comment about his son, again, like spanking was a lot more common back then. Especially when like his parents were children, right? Again, like were like everybody sociopaths just because they spank their children? Like I feel like that's a bit of a caricature. It's like liberal sentiments. I felt like they could have found like better examples, and I tried to think of some, and of course Tony does a good job like covering up like the specifics, obviously. Right? She doesn't really know the ways in which she's actually enhanced his practices. Like one of the ways in which Tony used therapy to benefit his mafia business was by making Junior the head and name, making Tony himself the de facto leader. But the problem is that he never told her that. But then that got me thinking: is that she should have confronted him on that. She should have like asked him, right? Like if I had written this, she should have asked him like, in what ways have you truly changed? And in what ways have you enhanced your mafia business? She should have just like flat out asked him the question, right? Instead of, and like maybe you could have kept in the "my fucking wife," and maybe I should have kicked his ass, like stuff like that. Like that's fine. Like it's more the fact that it's only those things. Just add in those things that I mentioned, right? Right. Just highlight like the actual guilt, right? Perhaps, right? When she asks them, in what ways have I benefited your mafia business? Highlight the fact that she's like aware that like, holy shit, what have I done by sitting down with you all these years? And again, like, in what ways have you changed? In what ways have I benefited your mafia business? Right? That highlights what's going on in her head. Right? Those are the questions she should have asked. And that also highlights her complexity. And another aspect of her complexity, which, like, the last season, they were having her have, like, these wet dreams about having sex with Tony. And then, like, this season, there was, like, none of that, right? Like, it was just, like, outright contempt for him. And then she just sends him off. And it's just like, is that it? I felt like there should be a little bit more there. Right? They need to cover ground in that realm as well. And I'm not entirely sure exactly what they should do there. I'm not saying I could write the whole thing myself, but I don't think they can just plant seeds and then just ignore that. So those are my issues there. All right, moving on. The ending. It was all right. So I think I mentioned at the very, very, very beginning of this long series of videos that I knew what the ending was. Like, when I say the ending, I mean like the very, very ending. I didn't know like every aspect of the episode, but the famous cut to black. I knew that, right? At the very least, it was basically an Inception style ending, something like that. And to be honest, I don't really give a shit about that. Like, I can understand why people are pissed. It's one of those things where like you temporarily have the blue balls. You just gotta know. But after a while, you gotta think about it, and you gotta understand like what exactly is the point, right? Like the point of Inception is that he stopped caring, right? He stopped caring and he walked away and said hi to his children, right? When throughout the entire movie, he refused to even look at his children's faces because he wanted to get back and see them in reality. And he's just like, I'm not going to even look at them in a dream first, right? I want to get to reality, then I'll look at their faces. And in Inception, once you get to that final scene, he's just like, I don't care anymore. I'm just gonna, he spins it, and then he just goes and says hi. So, again, the fundamental point then is it doesn't really matter whether he's in reality or not, because he doesn't care. Now, that said, I think there are right ways and there are wrong ways to do ambiguous endings. And I'm not entirely sure that this was the best way to handle an ambiguous ending. And this, keep in mind, this is not even my main critique. My main critique is actually going to come later. um, but I just want to get this out of the way here. When you're doing an ambiguous ending, there has to be, actual like build up to each of the potential interpretations, right? So in this case, there has to be like a build up to Tony dying, for example, right? That's one potential interpretation. Is that the infamous cut to black? It's just Tony getting shot in the back of the head or something like that, and then everything goes. And what I got from this actual storyline was that he essentially won, right? Like there was this big conflict between New York and New Jersey, those two mob groups, right? Phil Leotardo was too headstrong, and his own crew turned against him. Tony was able to leverage that and take out Phil. And at that point, like, a lot of people had died, right? And at that point, it's already been established that taking out a boss is like catastrophic, right? It means business, right? It means potentially war. It means endless conflicts, power struggles. And like that just happened, right? Like who the fuck wants more of that? Right? Like there's really no logic in killing yet another boss. So who is doing it? Who's going to do it, right? And keep in mind, like we're not talking about the inability to recognize anyone in the bar or the restaurant or whatever the place is, right? They could just be randos. They could just be foreigners, just like the people that shot the Ukrainian guy they thought was Phil in the penultimate episode, right? But I'm talking about the people who ordered the hit itself, right? Who could possibly want to order a hit on Tony at this point, right? Like literally all they wanted to do was go back to business, both sides. So there's basically no buildup, nothing. There's nothing there. And I don't know. And it kind of reminds me of like, it kind of reminds me of Troll 2. And before you get mad, this is like a pun intended, a troll comparison. It's like an extreme comparison, right? Troll 2 is like the worst, the most extreme example, where it's like they defeat the trolls at the very end, and then there's like this epilogue at the very end of the movie where like somehow the trolls come back and they kill everybody. And it's like there's no logic to it at all. Just it doesn't make sense. It's just like brutality for brutality's sake and shock for shock's sake. And just like what? Like why? Like how did they come back? I thought they killed everyone. Like it's just like okay. And yeah, it's just like this is kind of like a variation of that. Again, it's not as bad, but it's like if that's the interpretation, if that is the interpretation, Tony dying, then yeah, who the fuck, where's the logic in that? Who ordered the hit? And if it's not someone in New York, and if it's not someone in New Jersey, then who the fuck is it? It's just someone from the outside. Then it literally is like a Troll 2 scenario where it's just like out of nowhere. I guess that is the main critique of at least the potential for the main critique of this ambiguous ending here. They should have made Tony's victory more ambiguous, right? They should have made it so that there were, say, potential tensions, made it so that someone could potentially order a hit, right? Something's hanging over his head, right? And they should have made it a bit more concrete, right? Not just some vague, abstract, oh, someone might kill him. No, like, there needs to be an actual chain of logic growing out of the actual events of the story that we just saw. And that was that's primarily the issue, right? The actual ambiguous ending, I do think the idea of it works, right? Like, just like I mentioned with the Inception ending, how like the entire point is that he stops caring about whether he is in actual reality or not. This is more about leaning on the fact that you're just living in constant anxiety, right? You never know when it's going to happen. And now we're never going to know. We're basically in Tony's position, right? And that's where it's at, right? And we don't get any satisfaction, just like he's never going to get any satisfaction. Right? That's the life he chose. So, in that sense, I do think that it kind of works. Now, I want to move on to my actual critique. And this is not a critique of the ending, so much as it is a critique of, I guess, the broader storylines, like the actual climax. And this is because I think people are so caught up in the ending, and oh, what are all the different interpretations and all that they kind of forget like what the actual broader storylines could have been, right? Tony could have actually lost, potentially, right? You could have flipped this on the head and had Tony lose the war with New York. Or he could have made critical decisions that have led to could have led to like serious losses, right? And this could have solved that problem that I mentioned before. And I think the big thing that I want to bring up here is a lot of this could have involved his children. And this is really what I want to get into here. Because what we saw in this season is that he killed Christopher, right? What you saw with Christopher is that he was in a very toxic relationship with Christopher. Christopher was basically sacrificing everything for Tony. And Tony was just kept taking and taking and taking and abusing and abusing. And then he finally just killed him mercilessly. And he just had no self-reflection over any of it. What I think the story really missed out on was how Tony could have been pressed with regards to both Meadow and AJ, right? And I'm not saying that he needs to go like full sociopath, right? In fact, I do like characters that are complex, right? In fact, if he did go full sociopath, I'd kind of be kind of disappointed. Right? That's kind of what turned me off about the whole Tony and Melfi situation, which is that it felt a bit too simplistic, right? But like with AJ in particular, right? I mentioned before that they should have stretched out a lot of what happened with this character out into season 5, even season 4. You should have gotten involved with, say, the mafia, um, the little man mafia, the college mafia, and maybe that could have got him eventually butting heads with Tony's mafia scene, and that would force Tony to make a decision. And then when push comes to shove, he doesn't make the right decision. Just like he ends up making the right decision with Tony B, he doesn't end up making the right decision with AJ. And because of that, this is why there's all these tensions, right? Like maybe he still manages to solve the situation in like a really messy way, right? But there's a lot of fucking tensions. Maybe one of their close associates dies because of Tony's actions, right? Maybe like Syl dies or something like that. Or Syl ends up a vegetable like he does in the actual show, and that's what creates the ambiguity, the actual tension, the potential that he might end up getting shot. And with Meadow, I don't have anything pre-thought out for her, but actually I do. It's one of those things where like maybe the Vince, I almost said Vince plotline, Vito plotline could have escalated into something where she starts to see the darker side of Tony, or maybe when she gets involved in the legal side of things, she gets involved somehow, and again, this forces Tony to make a choice, and he begins to realize that Meadow is maybe not entirely on their side, but I don't know. I'm a bit. I feel like you should either do one or the other. Now I'm voicing this, it doesn't have to be both. Yeah. So, I mean, that is the extent of the notes that I wrote. Yeah, I did have quite a bit of issues with this last season. I did enjoy a lot of what I saw, but I think the irony here is that, while at the ending, again, it was very polarizing. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it. I just thought it was all right. And the reasons I don't like it is not even the reason other people don't like it. The reason I like it is, I mean, I think it has potential, right? I like the idea of it, but it's just, yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting to go back and watch these older shows. I mean, they're much better written than some of the crap that we see today. That's for sure. And but it's also interesting to see how, like, they're not as like perfectly written as I would have anticipated. They're not perfection. Let's just put it that way. So we'll just leave it at that. It's probably a very long video. But actually, let's finally let's actually rank this according to not like an explicit ranking, but compared to all the other seasons. Again, there are good moments throughout the entire season, but frankly speaking, I think the high point of this entire series is still season 1. And then season 5 is the other high point. Season 6 is pretty good, but yeah, I don't know. Either way, even when it goes wrong, it still provides interesting things to think about. So either way, I still think season 2 is the worst. And season 6, certainly not my least favorite. And it's just somewhere in the middle. Yeah. So we'll leave it at that.
I have now released both volumes of The Paths We Have Taken, which is the first arc in the Broken Reality. This is my grim, dark, epic horror fantasy series. It takes the political intrigue of A Song of Ice and Fire, the abrasive characterization of Abercrombie, the long-term storytelling of One Piece, and the philosophical horror of the Second Apocalypse to explore the human capacity for cruelty. Check it out if you are interested.